Lessons from a Sheepdog by Philip Keller. The story. Lass, a beloved border collie. This is a simple story about a special dog who shared life with me on my first sheep ranch. Though she bore the very ordinary name Lass, she was in fact a most extraordinary dog. My memories of her companionship, loyalty, and love linger across the years as colorful recollections. Even more important and precious, however, were the powerful spiritual principles God enabled me to learn through working with this beautiful border collie. Some of us are slow to grasp the basic truths of divine design. We cannot always clearly comprehend Christ's call to us in simple service. For that reason, His gracious Spirit often uses the common experiences of life to shed the intense light of supernatural truth upon our path. It is the basic principle of using parables drawn from our workaday world to help us clearly understand the noble, wondrous purposes of our loving Father. This last did for me as a young man. I was only in my late 20s when she came into my life. There were searching, burning questions in my spirit then that no sermons or studies had ever resolved in me. Yet in His gracious, generous way, God used this dog to help me see what He Himself is like in character and conduct. He taught me emphatically what His highest purposes and best intentions were for me as His friend and co-worker. For He does make it very clear that as His people, He calls us to special service with Himself. As a lad, I had grown up with cattle. On our land in East Africa, my father had bred the finest of the breeds adapted to the tropics. His cattle were a special joy to him. The splendid bulls that sired our calves, the sturdy oxen that hauled our wagons and worked our fields, the handsome cows that produced our milk were a marvel to the Africans. When I came to North America to complete my university training in animal husbandry, cattle still played an important role in my career. I worked on various ranches and longed for the day when I would purchase my own spread and establish my own herd. By my mid-20s, I had been manager of one of the most beautiful ranches in the interior cattle country of British Columbia. There I was given a magnificent, courageous cattle dog named Paddy. He was excellent with our heifers and saved me hours of work in handling the stock. It was shortly after this that I found a piece of neglected ranch property at the southern tip of Vancouver Island. Because it was so abused, the place did not attract much interest, but I could see its potential. It was an estate sale, so cash had to be paid for the property. The net result was I had insufficient funds left to purchase cattle, so I was obliged to start out with sheep. It quickly became obvious that dear old Paddy was completely baffled and bewildered by sheep. In disgust and dismay, he began to resign himself to snoozing in the sun or sleeping by the fire. I realized that I had faced a serious dilemma with my first flock. I simply had to find a sheepdog to help me handle the ewes and lambs that grazed on my impoverished pastures. My highest hope was to come across a well-bred border collie, for of all the breeds, they are the finest sheepdogs. In passing, I might mention that during those initial months at Fairwinds, for that is what we called our spot by the sea, I began to wonder seriously why I had allowed myself to be stuck with sheep. Compared to cattle, they seemed stupid, timid, frail, vulnerable to diseases and parasites, and easy prey to predators. Little did I then comprehend the wondrous ways of God, or His hand at work behind the scenes of my affairs. Little did I realize the enormous eternal lessons he would teach me on these wind-blown acres where I struggled to make a beautiful country estate out of derelict land. One day there was a short advertisement in the city newspaper. It read, "Wanted, a good country home for a purebred border collie. Chases, cars, and bicycles." I hurried up to a neighboring rancher's house and phoned the owner in town, some 27 miles away. "Yes," the lady replied. "I still have the dog, but do come quickly. No one else wants her." Her voice sounded desperate. In short order, I drove down the winding country road and pulled up outside a little cottage in the suburbs. The lady was waiting for me at the gate. Almost before I can get out of the car, she began to talk excitedly. "Mr. Keller, I can't do a thing with this creature. The dog is plumb crazy. She's loco." The woman threw her arms up in dismay. "All she does is tears after the kids, chases boys on bicycles, jumps all the fences, and races after every car that comes by on the road." "Please let me see her," I requested, trying to calm the owner's excitement. "Maybe I can do something with her. I've had dogs all my life." She led me around to the back of the house, and as we entered the little yard, a leaping bundle of dog flung herself toward me. She snarled and snapped, then collapsed in a heap on the ground. Instantly, to my shock and horror, I saw the dog was not only chained from her collar to the steel post, but also was hobbled with a second chain from her neck to her back leg. What a pitiful spectacle. Crouched in the dirt, the dog glared at me. Her ears were laid back in anger. Deep, guttural, menacing growls rumbled in her throat. "How old is she?" I asked, my question put to the owner to help cover the profound pity and love that welled up within me. "And what is her name?" The owner replied that the dog was 2 years old and her name was Lassie. I looked at the border collie with mingled emotions. She was a dog gone wrong, almost beyond hope or help. Yet somehow I saw beyond this. In her I saw a keen intelligence and a great capacity to learn. She had a splendid constitution with deep, wide chest, broad back, and strong legs. The master breeders had done a magnificent job of producing such a superb creature. At 2 years of age, most dogs have learned all they ever will know, I remarked to the lady. But she is too beautiful to destroy. I am prepared to give her a chance to change. The owner was still tense, waiting for my next words. "I will take her home to my ranch on one condition." I weighed each word carefully. "If I cannot do a thing for her, after 6 weeks, I'll bring her back to you. She is too lovely a specimen for me to put her away. You must then destroy her." The lady gladly agreed to my proposition. So I unhobbled Lass. From now on, that would be her name. I led her out to my car and put her behind the front seat for the long ride home. All the way I talked to her reassuringly in a gentle voice. All I got in response were low growls. Occasionally I would try to put my hand back to touch her or pet her, but she would bare her teeth and snap back angrily. Reaching the ranch, I felt a peculiar inner assurance that somehow this torn and twisted dog would be redeemed. Our land lay at the very end of the country road where it ran into the sea. There were virtually no cars to chase, no boys on bicycles to tempt her, just the wide rolling pastures and the rugged shoreline where ocean waves thundered against the land. Most important, there was a new master. Lass was given a kennel with fresh, clean bedding. She had a bowl of sparkling water and a dish heaped with food. She would touch none of them. Every advance made to touch her was rejected. Any attempts to call her were resisted belligerently. Day followed day. She was beginning to lose condition, and I even began to fear she might die. In an act of faltering faith, I settled on a daring step. I decided to set her totally free. The instant I did so, she fled into the forest behind our cottage. In a matter of moments, she had disappeared from view, and I wondered if I'd ever see her again. For several days, I drove up and down the road looking for her, asking other ranchers in the area to let me know if they saw her. But there was no sign anywhere. It was as if she had simply vanished into ocean air. Then one evening, I happened to glance up at the top of a large rock outcrop behind our home. There on the summit, Lass lay crouched like a hunted cougar, looking down at me. I called her name, but she turned and fled. That evening, I took food and water and placed them on the rock for her. At dawn, they were gone. I fed her regularly, but there was no response to any of the overtures I made to her. A couple of weeks later, a small band of sheep grazed near her lookout. I noticed she took a keen interest in them. She would cock her head, rise on her haunches, and watch them intently. Her latent instincts were coming to life. So evening after evening, I brought up a few ewes and lambs to graze near her. During this time, though no intimate rapport had been established between us, I felt an enormous compassion for this beautiful dog. An intense longing permeated my whole being for her to come to me, to get to know me, to trust me, to learn to love me, to work with me, to be my friend. Yet week was following week, and the time was approaching when she might have to be destroyed. It was an appalling alternative that filled me with dismay. Then one evening the sun was setting in a golden haze over the ocean. The sheep were grazing contentedly at the water's edge. I stood entranced, my hands clasped behind my back, caught up in the wonder of it all. Suddenly, I felt a soft, warm nose touch my hands. Lass had come. My heart seemed to stop with ecstasy. Contact had been made. She had found the fortitude to let me touch her life. It was the turning point in our association. Lass discovered that she had a new master whom she could truly trust. She had come into the care of one who really loved her, who understood her, who had only her best interest in mind. She also began to realize that not only did I understand her, but I also knew all about sheep, ranching, and the exciting part she could play in the whole operation. On the basis of our mutual affection and trust, I began to teach her the commands so essential for success. Because of her alert mind and fine intelligence, she learned very quickly. The familiar phrases and orders such as come, lie down, sit, fetch them, stay, to the left, to the right, were readily understood and soon obeyed. From voice commands, we gradually progressed to silent hand signals, so that even if she was a great distance from me, she understood what to do. She would watch the movement of my right arm and outstretched hand. So she became able to handle the sheep with remarkable skill. One of the truly touching aspects of our deepening friendship was her utter devotion to me. Where before she had been shy, distant, and antagonistic, now she became my virtual shadow. Where I went, she went. My presence was her peace and her pleasure. She became essentially a one-man dog. She would eat and drink only what I provided. She was mine, and mine alone. Strange as it may seem, the most difficult command for her to comply with was stay. Sometimes it meant that she would have to hold a bunch of lambs in the corner of a field or guard a gate or keep watch over some unruly lambs while I was doing another job. It was very trying for her to have me disappear from view. She was eager to be where the action was. She would sometimes be sorely tempted to break faith and take off on other tempting escapades. Two of these were somewhat amusing, yet also posed serious problems if they were in the midst of handling the flock. The first was the colony of crows that had their rookery in the trees on a small rocky island just offshore. The black rascals would come winging in over our fields, then swoop down low over Lass to taunt and tease her. Unable to restrain herself, she would leap to her feet and race away after her tormentors. She seemed literally to fly over the fields, her lithe and graceful body appearing almost airborne. It was a spectacular show, but it did neither the sheep, the ranch, or her master one particle of good. The second cause of her discomfiture were the great land-clearing fires we had in the winter. Sometimes the flaming sparks and glowing cinders carried up and away in the wind were so exciting she would go leaping and bounding after them. Occasionally, one would catch her in her long, lustrous coat and begin to burn with an acrid odor. Lass would roll wildly in the grass, then shaking herself come racing back to me as if to say, "Well, boss, wasn't that a grand display?" Yes, it was, but it had only wasted her energies, sapped her strength, and caused her to break faith. She could quickly sense when I was disappointed. She knew at once when a coolness came between us because of her misconduct. She would have to be corrected for her failure to be faithful in the line of duty. These were difficult moments for both of us, but they were absolutely essential for her well-being and mine. The operation of the ranch and our success with the sheep depending in large measure upon her implicit obedience. When the discipline was done, I would gather Lass up in my arms. I would caress her head, rub her chest, and whisper in her ear, "It's all over, girl." Her eyes would shine again. There was total reconciliation, restoration. In pure pleasure, she would leap out of my arms, race around on the grass in a wide circle, and come leaping back into my warm embrace. Perhaps the most powerful memory that lingers with me about this delightful dog was her increasing willingness to do anything I asked of her. She was totally, instantly available for any task, no matter how tough or trying. On the ranch, we had some rather rugged, rough, cut-over country. The sheep would scatter out into this difficult terrain of rock outcrops, wild rose thickets, down timber, and windfalls. They were searching for special sweet mouthfuls of grass and leaves not grazed before. Because of my height, I always could see where the lambs and ewes were in the broken country. Lass could not. I would have to send her into these tough spots to round up and bring out the entire flock. For her, it was virtually going in blind, trusting me implicitly. "Bring them in, Lass. Bring them in," I would command her. "Don't leave a single stray behind." She would go bounding away over the rocks, through the windfalls, into the rose thickets. Often when she finally came out with all the flock, her face would be scratched, her fur would be clogged with burrs, her feet would be cut or torn. But she had obeyed, never mind the suffering endured. Because of such devotion and faithful service, trust and affection were built between us. Looking back across those precious years at Fairwinds, I was learning from Lass what it was that Christ, the great shepherd, wanted to do with me in his fields as his co-worker.